The windshield wipers slapped back and forth as Mark Tanner rounded the sharp bend, the mountain road slick with runoff. Without warning, a silhouette appeared in his headlights, a lone figure soaked through to the skin standing perilously close to the cliff's edge. Mark's heart thundered as he hit the brakes, tires squealing like a warning siren, and the truck skidded within inches of the drop. He threw it into park, grabbed his flashlight, and sprinted through the downpour. Rain pounded his jacket, but he didn't care. He reached the woman just as she stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the gravel. Mark lunged, catching her elbow, pulling her to solid ground. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating her haunted eyes, and a single whispered name, Mia. In that instant, Mark knew his ordinary life had spun off course into something extraordinary. If you've ever wondered how one moment can change everything, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. Follow along as we unravel Mark and Mia's journey, full of mystery, heartache, and the kind of hope you'll never forget. Mark guided Mia up the slick embankment toward his truck, every step a fight against gravity and the gale-force wind. She moved like a ghost, limp, unsteady, her thin dress clinging to her frame. He half carried her, half led her toward the open door, heart pounding, not just from the chase, but from the fear in her eyes. As he helped her settle onto the passenger seat, he saw bruises speckling her ankles and calves, dirty smudges that spoke of miles walked barefoot in the cold. He slammed the door shut against the storm, then circled to slide behind the wheel, the engine coughing to life in protest. Inside, the heater sputtered warm air. Mia hunched closer to the dash hands pressed against the glass, as if seeking answers in the streaked reflections. Mark watched her profile, high cheekbones, hollowed cheeks, eyes too large for the face they inhabited. "Hey," he said softly, glancing in the rearview mirror. "You're safe now." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. He turned off the radio and focused on the road ahead. Every mile to Silver Ridge felt longer than the last, the headlights cutting through sheets of rain that blurred roadside trees into smudged specters. Mark's mind raced, no ID, no memory, just a name she barely spoke. He thought of his daughter Lily, waiting at home with a bowl of popcorn and too many questions. How would she react to a stranger in their living room? But he couldn't leave this woman to fate's mercies, not after the risk she'd taken standing alone on that mountain edge. At the turnoff to his gravel driveway, the porch light blinked on as if greeting him. The little ranch house looked small and vulnerable under the storm clouds, but to Mark it felt like refuge. He eased the truck close to the porch, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in silence before reaching across to unlatch Mia's seatbelt. "Come on," he said, voice gentle. "Let's get you inside." She rose with an unsteady grace, eyes fixed on where he indicated the door. Inside, dry warmth wrapped around them. Mark fetched a towel from the hall closet, soft, thick-scented faintly of pine wood soap, and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then let him. He guided her toward the guest room where the bed was neatly made, the quilt faded but clean. A nightstand held a lamp and a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He switched the lamp on, bathing the room in a soft glow. "Rest here," he said, closing the door gently. "I'll bring you some dry clothes in a minute." Mia nodded once, her gaze distant, and sank onto the edge of the bed, as if rediscovering how to sit. Downstairs, Lily peeked around the corner, eyes wide behind her blonde waves. "Dad? Who is she?" Mark knelt to meet his daughter's gaze. "She's someone who needs our help," he answered. "Her name's Mia." Lily nodded solemnly, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Okay." She padded back to her room, and Mark heard the door click softly behind her. Mark stood by the window watching raindrops bead and race down the glass. Every instinct screamed that Mia didn't belong here, or anywhere someone out there was looking for her, and they might not be kind. He turned away from the storm, crossed to the hallway, and tested the guest room door. No sound. He exhaled, acknowledging his own worry. Back in the kitchen, he laid out dry sweatpants and a flannel shirt on the counter. "Here," he said, placing them on a stool. "Change into these if you want." He filled a glass with water and set it beside them. He didn't know when Mia would emerge, but he wanted to give her space and comfort in equal measure. He walked to the living room where his tool belt lay by the couch. Wrenches, screwdrivers, his everyday armor. He realized he'd need those skills soon. A broken heart, a broken mind, both might need fixing. Hours later, Mia found him in the garage staring at the locket he'd discovered in her jacket pocket. He held it in his hand, a delicate silver heart with an engraved, "To Sophie Love, always." Mark's breath caught. Sophie Carlyle, a name he'd heard in news reports and idle barroom conversations, the little girl who vanished from a billionaire's gala in 2002. He clicked open the locket beneath the magnifying lamp and saw the photograph of a distinguished man at a grand piano eyes that belonged to no stranger. Mia watched him work the locket open. "That's my name," she whispered, voice brittle. "Sophie." He blinked, turning to face her. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "I'm Sophie Carlyle," she said. "I thought my name was Mia." The pieces snapped together in Mark's mind. The fear, the amnesia, the miles walked in a thin dress, the setting sun. He felt a surge of protectiveness and dread. Sophie Carlson was more than a lost girl. She was a living mystery, wrapped in secrets. He closed the locket gently and faced her. "Rest, Sophie," he said softly, using the name she'd long forgotten. "Tomorrow, we figure out where you came from and who tried to erase you." Sophie nodded and turned away, slipping out of the garage. Mark watched the frail curve of her shoulders as she retreated into the house. The storm outside had not yet broken, but within him a tempest stirred, a determination to help this girl reclaim her past piece by fragile piece. And so began a journey neither of them could have foreseen, spurred by a single act of kindness on a rain-swept mountain road. Mia stirred as the first shafts of sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, illuminating the steam rising from a stack of fluffy pancakes. She blinked against the brightness, feeling the scratch of a soft sweater around her shoulders and the warmth of a ceramic mug cradled in her hands. Her throat was parched, and the knot of anxiety that had kept her awake all night tugged at her chest. She looked down at the plate before her, 3 perfect circles of golden batter butter melting into glossy rivulets and syrup pooled at the edges. For a moment it felt safe, normal, until Lily's small shadow stretched into view. "Good morning," Lily whispered, leaning against the doorframe, her blue eyes wide and curious. A half-eaten bowl of popcorn still sat on the sofa behind her, forgotten. "I made pancakes, Daddy. I remember how you like 'em." She pointed to a second plate with syrup jagged at the edges. "Thanks," Pumpkin Mark said from behind Mia, gently brushing her damp hair away from her face. His voice carried that quiet reassurance that for a moment let Mia forget the question swirling in her mind. She glanced at him, startled to realize he stood so close, apron tied neatly around his waist, spatula in hand. "Here," he said, sliding the second plate toward her daughter before turning his attention back to Mia. He took a seat across from her at the sturdy oak table, folding his hands. The kitchen smelled of coffee and pine soap, a comforting combination that felt oddly grounding. Mia lifted the mug to her lips and sipped. The warmth spread through her chest, and her body trembled less, though her heart still pounded with every innocent detail of the morning. She set the mug down with a small clink. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're welcome," Mark said gently. He gestured toward the pancakes. "Eat something. You look like you haven't slept or eaten in days." She nodded, hesitated, then cut into the stack. The first bite was sweet and familiar, and for a flash Mia felt a childlike wonder, like she remembered this feeling, this simple ritual. But then the syrup dripped to her lap, and she jerked her head up, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It's okay," Mark said, pulling a cloth napkin from a drawer and handing it to her. "No need to worry about the mess." Mia dabbed at her lap, still trembling. She looked sideways at Lily, who was now perched on a chair to Mia's left, swinging her legs. The little girl studied her with a mix of excitement and caution. "What's your name?" Lily asked, at last, voice small but steady. Mia swallowed. She felt the question like a blade, an explanation dangling beyond her reach. She began searching for any anchor. "Mia?" she finally whispered, as though rehearsing a prayer. "My name is Mia, but I thought," Mark said, his voice quiet but firm. "We'll talk about that in a bit. For now, you're Mia, safe with us." Lily nodded, satisfied. She reached for a pancake and ripped off a bite, humming in approval. Mia managed a small smile at the child's ease, and her shoulders eased just a fraction. After a few bites, Mia set her fork down and exhaled a tremulous breath. She pressed her palms to the table knuckles white. "I don't remember anything," she admitted. "Not where I came from, not how I got here. Just my name." Her voice quavered. "And that locket, you called it Sophie." Mark sat back, fingers steepled. We'll get to that. But first, let's focus on today. No hospitals, no police unless you decide you want that. Right now, I want you to feel safe. We'll take it one step at a time. Mia looked at him, trying to read his expression. He had the kind of face people trusted, a gentle strength in his eyes, a quiet resolve. She felt tears prick at her lids, but swallowed them down. Thank you, she managed again, her voice cracking. Of course, he said softly. He stood and cleared her plate, then returned with a damp cloth to wipe the table. Lily hopped down and scampered off toward the living room, popcorn forgotten once more. Mark returned with a small notebook and a pen. He placed them in front of Mia. I want to try something, he said. Whenever you remember a word, an image, even a feeling, write it down here. Doesn't matter if it makes sense. We'll follow every clue. Mia stared at the blank page, then ran her fingertip across the smooth paper. Okay, she whispered. She picked up the pen with a tentative grip. He nodded and moved to the counter to wash the dishes. Mia watched him, the ordinary task of rinsing plates seeming heroic in her foggy world. Over the sink, he glanced back at her. I used to help the sheriff's department with searches, he explained, his voice echoing slightly in the tiled kitchen. When I was married, we did missing person cases. I've seen a lot of grief, a lot of hope. I want to help you find yours. Mia's throat tightened. She tried to imagine a life before her name tags addresses a family who cared, yet everything remained blank. She looked down at the notebook, the page still empty. Let's start small, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. What's the first thing you feel right now? She closed her eyes, inhaled. The faint scent of rain on asphalt drifted in her memory. Wet gravel pine needles. She wrote a single word. Rain. Beneath it, she added a question mark. Mark peered over her shoulder. Good. That's a start. He smiled as if they were sharing a quiet victory. Later that morning, after cleaning up, Mark led Mia and Lily outside to the backyard. The frost from overnight glittered in the bright sun, and Lily tugged Mia's sweater, her energy contagious. Want to see the barn, Mark called. It used to belong to my grandpa. I keep tools out there. Mia nodded, and they headed to the red-tinged barn that still held the scent of old hay. Mark showed Lily how to open the sliding door. The hinges creaked. Birds chirped in the rafters, and shafts of light revealed specks of dust dancing in the air. He pointed to a rusted tool chest. Help me clean this up, he asked, facing Mia. She followed him inside the floorboards, groaning beneath her boots. He knelt and handed her a rag. Let's start small again, he said. Wipe off the chest. See what we find. As Mia rubbed away the grime, she uncovered embossed initials JL and a faded sticker of a cattle trailer. The initials seemed familiar, warm somehow. She ran her fingertip over them. Mark watched her closely. Those are mine, he said. My grandpa left them me. Seeing them might help you feel something connection maybe, or just a sign we're putting pieces back together. Mia nodded, surprised at how her chest loosened. It felt good to do a task with purpose, a purpose that didn't require memory or identity, just cleaning, making old things usable again. After they finished, Mark offered her a bottle of water, and Mia drank, deeply grateful. By midday, they returned inside, where Lily had a fresh batch of popcorn popping on the stove. Mia sat at the counter, watching the kernels dance, and let herself relax at the simple spectacle. Mark poured coffee into his mug and offered her the half-creamed cup he'd started earlier. She accepted, feeling buoyed by the morning's small wins. I know the morning was a lot, Mark said, lowering himself next to her. But you did great. How do you feel? Mia thought back pancakes, the barn, the locket, the burst of recognition. She felt more than just fear now. She felt a spark of something else, maybe hope. She managed a small smile. Better, she said. Like I'm not completely alone. Mark's eyes softened. Not alone, he repeated. We'll find your past, but meanwhile, you've got a place here. If you ever want to talk, I'm listening. If you want quiet, same offer. No pressure. She nodded, feeling gratitude swell. Thank you, Mark, she said, using his name for the first time that day. She paused, searching for words. I think I want to try. He reached over and squeezed her hand. Lily bounced onto the stool beside her, eyes shining. We should make a poster, Lily said, poking at her brother's art supplies. Missing person. Maybe we can help find your family. Mia looked at Lily's enthusiastic face and felt a surge of affection for this small girl. Maybe she agreed. She reached for the notebook. But first I'm going to write down a few more memories. She lifted the pen, paused, then wrote another word. Piano. Beneath it she sketched a jagged line like a heartbeat. Mark looked over and nodded. One step at a time, he said. Mia agreed silently, watching the pen move across the page. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time since she woke on that mountain road, she felt a flicker of agency, a chance to reclaim her story. And with every word she wrote, the past felt just a little more within reach. Mia lingered in the living room long after Mark had left to fetch dinner, her gaze fixed on the silver locket clutched in her palm. The metal was cool and heavy, the delicate chain coiled like a secret around her fingers. She brushed her thumb against the front where subtle engravings traced a curling script she couldn't quite make out. The locket felt oddly familiar, as though it belonged to a life she'd once lived but had forgotten. Her breath caught, and memories fluttered at the edges of her mind. Shadows of a melody, a man's voice urging her forward, a flash of candlelight in a grand hall. She opened the locket, wincing at the tiny click. Inside, a photograph stared back a distinguished older man in a tuxedo, seated at a grand piano, hands poised above the keys as if mid-composition. His hair was salt and pepper, and his gaze held something both proud and solemn. Mia's heart hammered. She pressed her fingertip to the glass over his portrait, and a single word echoed in her thoughts, Willamir. The name flickered like a spark too specific to be random, too vivid not to be real. Downstairs, Mark returned carrying a plate of roast chicken and vegetables. He paused when he saw the locket in Mia's hand. "You found it," he said quietly, setting the food on the coffee table. Steam rose in lazy curls, but Mia barely noticed the scent of rosemary. Where did this come from? She met his eyes, pale and wide in the lamplight. "Pocket," she whispered. "When I woke up in your truck." She trailed off, uncertainty flickering on her face. Mark nodded and sat beside her, gently taking the locket and examining it under the lamp's glow. "Let's see what we've got," he said, opening his laptop on the table between them. Mia watched as he typed Willamir Carlisle, Estate, Colorado into the search bar. He clicked on a result titled Historic Carroll Estate Abandoned, and together they studied a grainy photograph of a sprawling mansion, ivy creeping up its crumbling columns, windows dark and broken. The article beneath it told of Richard Carlisle, a billionaire philanthropist whose only daughter Sophie vanished without a trace in 2002, just days after her 10th birthday gala. The estate had sat vacant ever since, tangled in legal battles and rumors of hauntings. Mia's breath came fast. Sophie Carlisle, she repeated, voice soft as a prayer. That was her name. Mark's jaw clenched. He leaned closer to the screen, scrolling through archived news clippings. Headlines like, "Billionaire's Daughter Disappears Nationwide." "Search for Last Carlisle Heir, No Sign of Sophie. After Stormy Weekend." He turned to Mia. "Do you think—" "I don't know," Mia said, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "But I feel it. I feel like I should know him." She pointed to the photograph in the article, then to the locket's portrait. "That's the same man." Mark closed the laptop gently. "It makes sense," he said, voice low. "If you really are Sophie Carlisle, that would explain everything, why you have no ID, why you remember nothing, why you've been walking barefoot through storms." He swallowed, eyes dark with concern. "But it also means there are people out there looking for you. Or maybe looking to keep you hidden forever." Mia's chest tightened. She pressed the locket to her heart. "What do we do?" she asked. Head bowed. Mark took her hand in his. "We'll figure it out. Tomorrow we'll start by calling my friend David Lorne. He's an attorney who specializes in family law and trusts. He might know the estate's status, who's in charge, what loopholes we can use." He paused, choosing his words. "Tonight, let's just rest. You've been through a lot." She nodded, trusting him enough to let the tension ease from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, voice wavering, "for believing me." He squeezed her hand. "Always." The next morning, the sky was pale and overcast, light filtered through thin clouds like a promise. After a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, Mark and Mia climbed into his truck again, retracing the winding roads toward the abandoned estate. As they drove, the Colorado plains opened up fields dotted with grazing cattle and the occasional juniper clusters. Mia stared out at the familiar countryside, a strange wistfulness tugging at her chest, as though returning to a childhood home she'd never lived in. They turned onto a gravel drive, flanked by rusted iron gates, the carryall name still etched into a weather-worn plaque. The truck rattled along the cracked circular drive weeds, pushing up through the fissures like veins reclaiming the ground. Mark cut the engine near the mansion's front entrance, and they sat for a moment in silence, the only sounds their own breathing and distant crows. Mia's hands trembled on her lap. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said softly. Mark nodded. "Let's see if we can find an unlocked door or a basement window. If anyone's been here, we need to know." He climbed out first, handing Mia a flashlight. She followed him across the cracked stones, the temperature dropping as the mansion's shadow fell over them. The front doors were padlocked, but a side entrance beckoned through a broken window. Mark pried away a half-rotted board, and they crawled inside. The foyer was cavernous, a grand staircase swept up on either side, its banisters rotten and dust-laden. Cobwebs draped every corner, and the air smelled of mildew and old wood. Mia lifted her flashlight to the walls where portraits stared down Richard Carlyle in military uniform, Sophie Carlyle as a smiling child. She paused before the child's portrait, tracing the painted bow in the girl's hair. Her heart pounded as if recognizing the image. Mark stood behind her, voice echoing in the vast space. "The archives say this place was locked down around 2008 after Eleanor Carlyle died. The trustees couldn't agree on anything, so it just sat." He stepped forward, directing the beam toward a hallway. "Shall we explore?" Mia nodded and followed him down the corridor. Each room held remnants, antique furniture draped in canvas newspapers strewn across a desk, a grand piano with yellowed keys in the parlor. Mia approached it, inhaling sharply. The piano looked identical to the one in the Lockett photo, same ornate legs, same lacquer peeling. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Her fingers hovered over the keys, memory stirring like a half-forgotten lullaby. With a tentative press, a single note echoed low and resonant. Mark stepped in beside her. "You remember that?" Mia swallowed, eyes closed. "Yes," she whispered. "It's my father's melody." The next note came more confident. Together they filled the silent house with the fragile strains of a song lost to time. In that moment, the mansion felt less empty, less abandoned, haunted, instead by a daughter's return. When the last note faded, Mia opened her eyes to find tears streaming down her cheeks. Mark reached for her shoulder. "We found more than words or pictures today. You found a piece of yourself." Mia nodded, absorbing the weight of the house's history and her place within it. "Thank you," she said softly, "for bringing me here." Mark smiled, though worry lingered in his gaze. "We're just getting started." They retraced their steps to the truck as dusk settled, knowing the estate held many more secrets. Secrets that, with every uncovered clue, would bring Mia closer to the life she once had and the identity she was reclaiming. The sky had bruised to a deep indigo by the time Mark Tanner navigated the final switchbacks through the pine forest headlights, cutting twin ribbons across the damp needles carpeting the ground. The engine's hum was the only sound inside the cab, save for Mia's soft breathing beside him, equal parts anticipation and dread. She pressed her forehead to the glass, tracing the blurred silhouettes of towering trees as they gave way to open space. Ahead, the Carlyle mansion emerged from the gloom like a monument to lost grandeur. Its once white facade was streaked with soot and shadow, columns choked in ivy. Windows stared back like hollow sockets. The wrought iron gates protested with a long, keening moan as Mark pushed them open, their hinges sounding a dirge for better days. Mia's grip tightened on the car door handle, knuckles paling beneath frayed fabric. "We're here," Mark said quietly, powering down the truck. Rain had begun, a fine mist that blurred the mansion's upper reaches into ghostly shapes. He reached over, offering her a flashlight from the dashboard. "Ready." Mia swallowed, bracing herself. "Ready?" She whispered, voice brittle but determined. They stepped onto the gravel drive, each footfall echoing against the walls of stilled history. Mark kept the beam low, illuminating broken stones and tangled vines. Mia followed him to the front stoop where the massive oak doors sat ajar, warped by years of neglect. She inhaled sharply at the scent of damp wood and decay, familiar yet strangely comforting, like the wrong side of a memory. Inside, their flashlights swept across a grand foyer. A crystal chandelier dangled precariously, prisms missing, but shards of crystal caught the light in 1,000 tiny reflections. Dust motes drifted in the beams, swirling like lost souls. Mia paused at the bottom of a sweeping staircase whose banisters were splintered paint flaking away in rough ribbons. She reached out, fingertips grazing the scarred wood. Every groove and notch seemed to resonate beneath her skin as if the banister itself held the weight of long-forgotten footsteps. Careful Mark prompted softly, his voice echoing in the vast space. He stayed a respectful distance behind, watching her with a mixture of concern and awe. Mia nodded, pressing her palm lightly against the rail. A flicker of warmth pulsed beneath her touch, a heartbeat in the stone-cold air. She closed her eyes, and for a brief moment she could feel herself ascending those stairs. Small hands slipping into her father's, echoes of laughter, in sunlight of music drifting through open windows. Her breath hitched. Mark placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You okay?" She opened her eyes, voice tight. "Yes," she said, though the single word sounded like a question. She glanced upward, the winding staircase looming above like a promise and a challenge. "Let's go." Step by tentative step, they climbed. Mia led Mark, following each board, groaning its own obituary. At the landing, a long corridor stretched to either side, lined with doors that no longer closed fully. Shadows pooled beneath them, and portraits painted decades ago peered down with dwindling recognition. Mia paused before one, the same sparkling child in a lavender dress she'd glimpsed earlier in Mark's living room. The little girl's eyes seemed to follow her, beseeching. She swallowed and moved on, drawn by the faint strains of memory. At the end of the hall, double doors opened into the parlor, a cavernous room anchored by a grand piano, its ebony case dulled by dust and neglect. The lid was closed as if in mourning, and sheet music lay scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. A single gilt-frame mirror above the mantel tilted forward, reflecting the room's desolation. Mia approached the piano with reverence, each step measured. Mark remained at the doorway, hands clasped in front of him. As she reached the piano bench, she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys. The air around her felt electric, charged with expectation and fear. Her breath caught, and she set the lid free. It fell with a reluctant creak, revealing keys yellowed by time. Mia lifted her right hand, fingers trembling over the lower register. She pressed a single chord, a soft, hesitant note that echoed like a question. Mark exhaled relief, mingling with wonder. Encouraged, Mia sought the next note, the melody unfolding with halting precision. Bass notes, then mid-range, and finally the lilting refrain, the melody her father had composed for her 10th birthday. A tune she had heard only once before vanishing into night. Each note cracked the silence open, splintering it into shards of recollection. Images rippled through her mind, candles flickering on a birthday cake, white roses drifting on a marble fountain, her father's arms encircling her, in the grand foyer music swirling as guests danced beneath strings of lights. Mia's eyes filled with tears. She pressed on the tune, transforming from tentative to confident, her hands finding each key as if drawn by an invisible thread. The piano's voice soared, filling the parlor with echoes of a life she'd thought lost forever. Mark rose and moved to stand beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. He closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. For a moment, the mansion felt less like a tomb and more like a home awakening from a long slumber. As the final note faded into the rafters, Mia's hands lingered on the keys, soul raw and exposed. Silence settled heavy, but not empty. Mia looked up at Mark, her chest heaving. "That was him," she whispered. "My father." Mark nodded, voice thick. "I heard it. Beautiful." He studied her face in the dim glow. "Does it feel real?" She swallowed, blinking back tears. "Yes," she breathed. "And wrong. It hurts and it heals all at once." Mark knelt to meet her gaze. "It means you're remembering. Every note is a piece of your past coming back." Mia's lower lip trembled. She nodded, hands clasping the edge of the bench. "I want to remember more." Her voice grew stronger. "I need to know what happened here that night." Mark rose, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "We will," he promised. "But you don't have to face it all at once." He guided her from the bench, and they moved together away from the piano, stepping across the worn rug toward the doorway. Mia paused, looking back at the instrument as though saying goodbye for now. The grand parlor seemed to exhale its secrets stirred but not yet revealed. Outside, the wind whipped through the broken windows, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Mark led Mia down the corridor and back onto the creaking staircase. She met each step with newfound purpose, strides steadier than before. At the bottom, Mark held the flashlight while Mia walked to the front doors and pushed them open. A cold rush of mist greeted them, but Mia inhaled deeply, eyes bright. Mark paused on the top step. "You did that," he said softly. "And you'll do more. One piece at a time." Mia nodded, giving him a small, weary smile. She clutched the locket at her throat. "Thank you," she said, voice firm. "For staying." He smiled back, the mansion's silhouette framed behind him. "Always." They stepped into the gathering dusk together, leaving the piano's echo behind, but carrying its melody in their hearts. And as they drove away, the mansion receded into shadow, its doors slightly ajar, waiting for the day Mia would return to claim every note of her life once more. Mia jolted awake long before dawn, heart hammering, as though the grand chandelier from her dream still swung above her. She lay tangled in the sheets of Mark's guest room, sweat soaking her borrowed sweater, the scent of fresh linen mingling with the metallic tang of fear. For a moment she tried to steady her breathing, counting inhalations, exhalations, until the edges of her dream receded, rows of white roses, petals drifting like ghosts, raised voices echoing off marble walls, a woman's red-lipped whisper urging, "Come with me. You have to go now." She bolted upright, breath caught in her throat, and pressed her palm to her forehead. The memory burned silk dresses, candles, the glitter of party lights. But beneath it all, a darker tension like thunder gathering behind polite smiles. Mia slid from the bed and padded to the nightstand where the locket lay open beside her notepad. She closed the tiny portrait of the man at the piano and snapped the locket shut, fingers shaking. Then she reached for her notebook and scrawled words and images, white roses, red lipstick, marble, voice, until the pen burned through the paper. Downstairs, the kitchen light blinked on, and Mark appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. "Mia," he called softly. "You okay?" She exhaled, rising from her chair at the table. "I had another dream," she said, voice hollow. "The chandelier, the roses, a woman in red lipstick dragging me through a hall." She sank into a chair. It felt real, like a warning. Mark set down his mug and poured her a cup of tea, the steam curling between them. "Nightmares can be memories you haven't quite processed," he said gently. He slid into the seat beside her. "You want to tell me more?" Mia wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. There were arguments, harsh voices over money and power. My mother's voice, maybe. And then that woman. She said my father wanted me safe, but she didn't look like someone who'd protect a child. Her eyes brimmed. She looked dangerous. Mark nodded, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "That fits what we heard at the estate. Someone whisked you away that night, and the trustees locked down the whole place." He reached across to squeeze her hand. "I'm sorry, Mia. This is harder than we thought." A sharp knock sounded at the front door. Mark stood and called to Lily upstairs to stay in bed. Then he crossed the room and opened the door to find David Lorne, his old friend and attorney, standing in the rain with a briefcase slung over one shoulder. David's salt and pepper hair was damp, and his glasses glinted with droplets. He stepped inside, expression grave. "Mark, Mia," he said, lifting his briefcase. "We need to talk." They moved to the living room where Mark set 2 mugs down and gestured to a pair of armchairs. The wood stove crackled softly, casting a golden glow across the room's worn pine floors. Mia perched on the edge of one chair, notebook at her side, while Mark and David took seats facing her. David opened his briefcase and withdrew a heavy envelope stamped Confidential Estate Trusts 2003. "I dug through the Carlisle archives," he said, placing the envelope on the coffee table. "I found an affidavit most people thought was destroyed." He slid the sealed document toward Mia. "Signed in September 2003 by the estate's housekeeper, Maribel Soto. It was filed in court, then immediately sealed by court order at the trustee's request, never to be seen again." Mia's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope. "What does it say?" she whispered. David unfolded the pages and began to read aloud. On the night of June 16, 2002, I witnessed 10-year-old Sophie Carlyle being escorted from the estate by a woman unknown to me. The woman's lips were painted bright red, and she held the child's hand firmly guiding her past the front entrance to a waiting vehicle. I implore the court to consider this testimony in the ongoing search for Sophie Carlyle. He paused, eyes on Mia. That was buried so deep no one ever heard it until now. Mia pressed her free hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. They buried it, she said, voice cracking. They hid the only proof I ever existed in that house. She closed her eyes, reliving her nightmares, the crush of whispered orders, the glittering hall, the red lipstick. Betrayal isn't even strong enough, she breathed. Mark leaned forward. Whoever did this had power more than just money. They had the law on their side. He looked to David. What can we do? David ran a hand through his thinning hair. We can unseal this affidavit, challenge the trustees' suppression, expose their cover-up. It's evidence of abduction of trustees abusing their authority to hide a child's disappearance. It won't be easy, but the law's on Mia's side now that we have her own testimony and this affidavit. He tapped the paper. This gives us the legal footing to force the records open. Mia nodded, eyes bright with determination. I want to do it. I want people to know the truth. She stood clutching the affidavit to her chest. No more secrets. No more running. Mark rose to stand beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face it alone. His voice was steady, protective. We'll navigate this together. David smiled grimly. I'll begin drafting the petition to unseal the records. We'll need to file by Monday to meet procedural deadlines. I'll handle the judges, the trustees, the motions. He closed the folder and slid it back into his briefcase. Consider this battle underway. Mia took a shaky breath. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mark. She looked between them, father and daughter, lawyer and friend, finding strength in their solidarity. I'm ready. Late that evening, after David left and Lily was tucked safely in bed, Mia sat alone at the kitchen table, the locket open before her. She traced the engraved initials and pressed it to her heart. The affidavit lay beside it, a promise of reckoning. She closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet house, I am Sophie Carlyle, and I will be heard. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves like applause and omen that the first act of her long-overdue redemption had begun. Betrayal had run deeper than she imagined, but so had her resolve to reclaim every piece of her stolen past. The chandeliered hall, the white roses, the red lipsticked woman, they would no longer haunt her. Instead, they would fuel her fight for justice with every secret laid bare and every truth reclaimed. Lena James's arrival was heralded by a faint chime at the front door. Mark Tanner answered to find a tall woman in her late 50s, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes as sharp as a hawk's. She wore a well-worn trench coat, even though it hadn't rained in days, and carried a battered leather satchel slung over one shoulder. Detective James Mark asked, stepping aside. Mornin', she replied, shaking Mark's hand firmly before turning her gaze on Mia. Mia. Her voice was simultaneously gentle and commanding, exactly the tone you'd want from someone who spent decades peeling back layers of deceit in cold cases. I've heard a lot about you. Mind if we talk? Mia nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. They led Lena into the living room where yesterday's papers still lay scattered across the coffee table. Mark poured Lena a cup of coffee. Mia wrapped her hands around a mug of chamomile tea. Lena set her satchel on the table and pulled out a slim folder. I've been looking into Matthew Dane. You remember that name? She asked, leaning forward. Mia closed her eyes and nodded. The security guy. The one who helped that red lipsticked woman. Lena exhaled, placing the folder before them. My research shows that Dane was never a licensed guard. No SSN on file, no training records, no background checks, like he existed only on paper. She tapped the folder. And after Sophie Carlyle vanished, he vanished too. No forwarding address, no phone number. He was a ghost. Mark frowned, glancing at the stack of photos Lena had spread out, Dane's grainy ID shot, a cropped boardroom photo showing him shaking Richard Carlyle's hand, and a still from security footage capturing a dark sedan pulling away from the estate's gate. Why would the board hire someone off the books, he asked. Exactly the question Lena said. She rifled through her notes. Carlyle Industries was dealing with messy lawsuits in 2002, hostile takeovers, shareholder revolts. Richard's daughter's disappearance gave them an excuse to consolidate power. They needed someone untraceable to move Sophie without leaving a paper trail. Dane fit that role perfectly. Mia's gaze flickered to the locket on the table. "You think they hired him to kidnapping me?" Lena nodded. Kidnapping, or protective custody, as they might euphemize it. Keep the heir safe from external threats, real or imagined. That's corporate doublespeak. Mark clenched his jaw. And then bury the affidavit Maribel Soto filed. Silence any potential whistleblowers. "That's standard procedure for corporate boards protecting their assets," Lena said flatly. "But it's illegal. You can't abduct a child and hide the evidence." She flipped to a new page. Here's where Dane disappears. His last known address was a P.O. box in Denver. No street address. But courtesy of an old contact in the postal inspectors, I got his forwarding request postmarked 2 weeks after Sophie's disappearance. It forwarded to a remote cabin near Aspen. Mia leaned forward, stunned. "So he took me there," likely Lena confirmed. And whoever was controlling Dane made sure he shut down any trace of that forwarding. No one checked those inspector logs for years because no one thought to. That forwarding was the only lead. Mark ran a hand through his hair. "So if we can find that cabin," Lena cut in. "It's in a national forest, plus the Forest Service records show the lease expired in 2004. Whoever it was left nothing behind but scattered trash and faint footprints. I staked it out last week. No sign of Dane himself, but I found a torn piece of his security badge in the trash." Mia's hand went to her mouth. "A badge from Carlyle Industries." Lena nodded, pulling out a small evidence bag with the fragment inside. Stamped with the Carlyle crest. "It proves Dane was officially linked to them at the time of your disappearance." Mia bit her lip. "So those trustees, I assume Evelyn Graves and the rest, knew exactly who he was, and they used him to hide me?" Lena leaned back, folding her arms. "Yes. And once you were out of sight, they used their legal clout to bury Maribel's affidavit and any police reports. They silenced the housekeeper and anyone else with first-hand knowledge." "How do we bring this into court?" Mark asked, voice taut. "We'll need to unseal those records officially," Lena said. "David Lorne will draft the motion. But we also need to find someone who saw Dane in action. Neighbors, Forest Service workers, anyone near that cabin. Their testimonies can corroborate Maribel's statement and connect Dane directly to the board's orders." Mia closed her eyes, the weight of betrayal settling in her chest. "And what about my father? Did he know? Was he complicit?" Lena's eyes softened. "From what I've seen, Victor Carlyle wanted to protect you." The board twisted his fear into a power grab. He was outmaneuvered by the very people he trusted. That doesn't clear him, but it does mean there's more nuance here. Mia exhaled, mind racing through memories of her father's gentle hands at the piano, the warmth in his eyes. She took a shaky breath. "I need to find that cabin. I need to know if what I dreamed is real." Mark stood. "We'll go first thing in the morning. We'll get Dane's cabin on record, gather any evidence left behind. You won't have to face it alone." Lena rose as well, dusting off her coat. "I'll coordinate with the Forest Service for a permit. We'll need to document everything: photos, soil samples, footprints. If Dane was cleaning up, he might have overlooked something: fabric fibers, a partial imprint in the mud. It all adds up." Mia nodded, steeling herself. "I want the truth, no matter how painful." Late that night, Mia lay in Mark's guest room, the locket open beside her. She stared at the portrait inside the man at the piano and let the day's revelation settle. Betrayal ran deeper than she ever imagined, but so did her resolve. She traced the engraving on the locket's back to "Sophie Love Always" and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Downstairs, Mark and Lena huddled over maps and permits, their hushed voices carrying a shared urgency. Forest boundaries, cabin coordinates, possible witnesses, they plotted the next day's expedition with meticulous care. Outside wind rustled the pine needles and the moon peeked from behind clouds. The night air held a promise that tomorrow they would chase shadows in the forest, unearth the secrets buried beneath moss and memory, and inch closer to justice for Sophie Carlyle, and for the little girl who had vanished into darkness, only to return and demand the truth. The doors to the boardroom swung open with an almost reverent hush. the polished cherry wood panels gleaming under the chandelier's soft light. Mia Carlyle paused in the doorway, her heart drum-like in her chest, then stepped forward alongside Mark Tanner and David Lorne. Around the long oval table sat the Carlyle Board of Trustees Evelyn Graves, at the head flanked by three men in tailored suits whose faces were chiseled with the confidence of inherited authority. Evelyn's smile was practiced cool as porcelain. "Mia," she said, voice smooth, "it's been, 20 years? We weren't expecting you back so soon." Mia's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "You weren't expecting me back at all," she replied evenly, crossing to the head of the table and placing a faded, yellowed envelope before Evelyn. The room fell unnaturally still. "This is a letter from my mother, Eleanor Carlyle, written just before she passed. She entrusted it to a friend with instructions to give it to me if I ever returned." She unfolded the letter, letting its weight and age speak before she began to read. "My darling Sophie," she intoned, voice clear. "If you are reading this, it means this world has kept you hidden too long. I need you to know that every moment we planned for your safe return, something went wrong. I'm sorry you suffered for our mistakes. I love you more deeply than the name we carry." She paused, eyes sweeping the room. "I'm here to reclaim that name." Across the table, Evelyn's hands were folded, expression impassive. The silent men exchanged glances so swift they might have been missed, an unspoken conference of worry passing between them. Mia laid the letter down and slid a second document forward, Maribel Soto's affidavit sealed for over a decade. David Lorne leaned in, reading aloud the passage that had terrified her as a child. The housekeeper's eyewitness account of the red-lipped woman guiding a terrified 10-year-old Sophie into a waiting car, the trustee's legal order sealing the statement, burying it from public view. Mark's steady presence at her side gave her courage, as the full weight of that betrayal settled over the boardroom. The men looked away, their perfect control cracking. Evelyn cleared her throat, voice brittle. "This is irrelevant, now ancient history. We've moved beyond those misguided legal maneuvers." Mia's gaze hardened. "It's very relevant, because children continue to disappear when those in power silence the truth. I'm not here for your apologies or your pity. I'm here to ensure no child ever vanishes again under the guise of protection." She placed one hand on the affidavit. "This proves what you did and why." A trustee named Gerald Whitman Gray at the Temples, steel-eyed, rose from his seat. "You have no standing here. The estate's in probate. You have no legal claim." His voice was loud, rehearsed, but his eyes betrayed panic. Mia turned sharply. "Legal claim I was the sole heir until you erased me. But I've come to do more than claim inheritance." She reached into her satchel and withdrew the charter for the Victor Carlyle Initiative. The charter glowed white on the cherrywood table, a plan for a foundation dedicated to protecting children displaced by legal loopholes, corporate greed, and corruption. She spread the pages before Evelyn. "This foundation will honor my father's legacy," Mia said, voice resonating through the silent room, "by safeguarding children who, like I was, are hidden under legal pretexts. We will provide legal aid, safe housing, and advocacy to prevent secret disappearances. And we will shine a light on any institution that thinks it can hide behind sealed documents and silent boardrooms." Evelyn's lip twitched, as if tasting something sour. "You're leveraging your name for a publicity stunt," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "And what do you expect donations a seat at this very table?" Mia shook her head, eyes blazing. "I expect you to stand aside. I expect you to return control of the foundation to its rightful purpose, service to the vulnerable, not secrecy for the powerful. If you refuse, I will go to the press, to the courts, to every oversight agency that can override your charters and your charades. My mother's confidant, Maribel Soto, is attending the hearing on Monday to testify. You may have buried her affidavit, but you can't bury her truth." The air in the room crackled as board members shifted uncomfortably. Whitman's face drained of color. Evelyn cleared her throat again, her cool veneer fraying. "This is highly irregular," she said. "We'll deliberate and respond in due course." Mia stepped back, chest heaving. "No," she said firmly. "I won't wait while you deliberate. Consider this an invitation. Join me in setting up the Victor Carlyle Initiative, or step aside. The choice is yours, but know this: every investor, every watchdog, every reporter, and every judge will be watching. and I will not be silenced again. She turned and strode from the room, Mark and David following. Evelyn watched her go, semblance of poise restored, but her trembling fingers betrayed panic. The other trustees exchanged glances filled with dread as the doors closed behind Mia. In the sudden stillness, the grand boardroom felt smaller, a gilded cage for secret-keeping now exposed to the light. Evelyn pressed her fingertips to her lips, eyes fixed on the charter and the affidavit left behind, and forced herself to stand. Betrayal had run deeper than anyone in that room had dared to admit, and now that girl Sophie Carlyle reborn would see to it that justice ran deeper still. The studio lights were brighter than Mia had ever imagined. So intense they burned through her nerves and left her hollow-eyed, every pore opening to the glare. She sat at the sleek black desk across from Alana Green, anchor of Colorado. Tonight, the state's highest-rated evening show. Cameras arced overhead like silent vultures calibrated to catch every flicker of emotion. Alana's practiced smile was a soft landing, warm, sympathetic, yet the air crackled with urgency. This was no human interest fluff piece. This was Mia's life laid bare for millions. Alana leaned forward, voice low but commanding. Mia, thank you for joining us tonight. Her gaze flicked to the monitor between them, where the chyron read Sophie Carlyle, reclaiming her voice. Your story has captivated the nation, the heir presumed lost now resurfaced and revealing a corporate cover-up. Before we speak to you, we have a clip that's been circulating online, reportedly from the night of your disappearance. Let's take a look. The screen behind Alana flashed to grainy security footage, a young girl in a lavender dress walking calmly to a car, placing a small suitcase in the trunk. A woman's silhouette guided her with an outstretched hand. The whole scene lasted less than 10 seconds before cutting away. On air, the clip felt uncanny, too neat, too sanitized, like an invitation for doubt. We've heard many claim that you walked away willingly, Alana said, turning back to Mia. What do you make of this footage? Mia's chest tightened, but she met Alana's eyes head-on. This clip was manufactured to rewrite my past, she said. Voice steady, though adrenaline edged every word. She straightened, hands clasped on the desk. A child doesn't arrange her disappearance. A child doesn't pack a bag at midnight and stroll into a waiting car. Not when she's terrified, not when she's being hidden from the only home she's ever known. Behind the screens, producers shifted, but Mia didn't falter. Her voice resonated through the cavernous studio, a clear bell in the static. I was 10 years old. I remember storm clouds, raised voices ricocheting off marble walls, and a chandelier's crystals shattering the light. I remember white roses drifting in water, and my mother's terrified whisper, "You must leave now." She drew in a breath. I wasn't arranged anywhere. I was taken, sequestered for the benefit of corporate greed and boardroom politics. Alana nodded, gesture gentle. You've also released new documents tonight, she reminded. Affidavits from Maribel Soto and your mother's letter. Can you tell us why you chose to go public now? Mia reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a sealed letter. This is my mother's confession, written days before she died. And this, she lifted Maribel's affidavit, is the first-hand testimony of the housekeeper who saw me being led away by the woman in red lipstick. For 20 years, these truths were buried by the very people entrusted to protect me. Her gaze roamed the audience cameras as if challenging each viewer. I went public because silence was never an option. My disappearance and my erasure were intentional. The trustees of Carril Industries manipulated the law to conceal a child's suffering. A murmur rippled through the control room as producers exchanged glances. On screen, Alana's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a powerful statement, she murmured. How do you respond to critics who say you're exploiting your own past for attention? Mia's eyes flashed with quiet fury. Exploiting, no. I'm exposing a cover-up. I'm reclaiming my own story. If truth is attention-seeking, then let the cameras be my witness. This isn't about me, it's about every child who's ever been hidden behind sealed court orders. She paused, voice softening but no less fierce. I'm not here for pity or fame. I'm here to ensure no one else vanishes under the guise of protection. Alana nodded with genuine respect. Tonight you announced the Victor Carlyle Initiative, a foundation to safeguard children lost to legal manipulations and corporate malfeasance. How will that work? Mia leaned forward, passion igniting her calm demeanor. We're launching the Emergency Advocacy Fund in January. It will provide legal representation for at-risk children, emergency housing for those displaced by family power struggles, and a hotline for whistleblowers who witness child concealment. This foundation will shine a relentless light on closed-door decisions because transparency is the only safeguard against repeating these crimes. Behind the scenes, the director's hand hovered over the fade-to-commercial button, but the moment was too raw, too compelling. Alana let the segment run its course, giving Mia room to articulate her vision. As the cameras rolled on, Mia took a breath and met the lens directly. If you know something, if you remember an odd transaction, a missing file, or anyone who never asked questions, call us. We will investigate. And we will hold every person accountable who thought that a child could be traded like a commodity, hidden for power and profit. The final shot lingered on Mia's face, determined, scarred, yet unbowed. Then the feed went live to the studio audience in millions of homes across the country. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then applause erupted in the studio, and on social media hashtags like #JusticeForSophie and #Carlisle, initiative began trending. Mark, watching from backstage, felt tears prick in his eyes. He slid behind the monitors to find David Lorne and Lena James, their faces illuminated by the post-broadcast analytics. "She was incredible," Mark whispered. David nodded, eyes bright. She cut through every pretense. Lena gave a small, pleased smile. "And now no smoke and mirror clip will hold sway." She set the record in living color. As the team regrouped, producers scrambled to analyze viewer feedback, emails flooding in calls to news desks, defections of former trustees pressured by public outrage. Overnight, Colorado's power corridors buzzed with whispered panic. In boardrooms, once immutable suits shifted uneasily. Mia emerged from the studio a different person, no longer the lost child clutching a locket, but a woman reclaiming her narrative, armed with truth and the backing of a mobilized populace. In that crucible of lights and cameras, she had refused to let high-tier lawyers rewrite her past. Instead, she'd written a new future, one where a child's voice, when amplified, could shatter the walls built by greed and secrecy. By dawn, her interview had been shared by millions, inspiring vigils in small towns and legislative proposals in the state capitol. And through it all, Mia's courage set off shockwaves far beyond Colorado's Rockies, a clarion call that no child, no matter how powerful the shadow that hides them, would ever be invisible again. When the offer arrived, it came wrapped in the kind of velvet glove you only see in boardrooms, a sleek folder bearing the Carriol Industries crest delivered by an impeccably dressed lawyer named Conrad Mills. Mark Tanner brought it into the living room late that morning, the envelope's weight a tangible reminder of the wealth Mia had once been heir to. Lily chased her rabbit toy in wide circles around them, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. Mia took the folder from Mark's outstretched hand, fingers brushing the embossed lettering. She felt its promise of millions, enough to erase any debt, to grant luxuries she had never known, but her heart pounded with the echo of every injustice she'd uncovered. She slit the folder open and read the terms of a multi-million-dollar reconciliation package contingent on a non-disclosure agreement barring her from speaking further about the trustees' actions. In exchange, they would restore her inheritance, grant her a directorship at Carriol Industries, and ensure her comfort and security. Mark watched her face as she turned the pages. He had expected this, and yet seeing it spelled out in crisp legal language still made his blood run cold. He caught Lily's eye, her daughter's curious gaze asking silently, "Will this change everything again?" Mia set the folder down and closed her eyes. She thought of the nights she'd lain awake, heartbeat echoing in the dark, piecing together her stolen past. The tears she had shed over the affidavit's finality, the survivors she had learned to champion. She thought of the child she had been 10 years old, hidden, silenced, and the woman she had become, resolute, unbroken. Finally, she opened her eyes and reached for Mark's hand. "I can't sign this," she said, voice calm but firm. "It lets them pay to bury my voice again." Conrad Mills, waiting politely at the threshold, cleared his throat. "Ms. Tanner, your father's board sincerely hopes you will reconsider. This is a generous offer, one that honors the Carlisle legacy." Mia stood, meeting his practiced smile with steel in her gaze. "My name is Tanner now, and I serve a different legacy." She turned away, lifting Lily into her arms. The child wrapped her tiny arms around Mia's neck, and Mia pressed a kiss to her hair. We've got our own path to walk." Conrad's smile faltered and he retreated with a nod. Mark closed the door behind him, the final click sounding like a door shutting on the past. That afternoon, they drove to the courthouse in Silver Ridge. The pale sky overhead seemed to watch them as they parked on the gravel lot. Mark walked Mia and Lily inside the old building's columns, echoing the weight of new beginnings. They approached the clerk's window, and Mia signed the papers, the legal declaration relinquishing Carlisle and adopting Tanner as her surname. The document clerk smiled warmly. "Welcome to the Tanner family, Ms. Tanner." Outside, Mia cradled the certificate in her hand and exhaled a long breath. Lily chattered excitedly about how cool it was to have the same last name as her dad. Mark ruffled Mia's hair, pride shining in his eyes. "Perfect," he said. "Now we build something new." Within days, Mia filed the charter for the Sophie Carlisle Foundation, though the board members who had once conspired against her would never again call her by her birth name. She chose the community center in Silver Ridge as its headquarters, a humble whitewashed building with a sagging porch perfect in its imperfections. She envisioned it filled with children's laughter, with legal advocates and therapists working side by side to untangle the knots of secrecy that trapped vulnerable kids. The foundation's launch day dawned bright and clear, the April sky washed in pastel blues. Mark helped Mia hang the foundation's banner across the porch. Sophie Carlisle Foundation Advocacy for Hidden Children. Neighbors arrived with casseroles and homemade signs, founders from the local nonprofit coalition, even Maribel Soto, the former housekeeper who had driven down from Boulder to bear witness. Lily stood on a milk crate with her own hand-lettered sign, "Welcome Home." Mia Tanner. Mia stepped to the microphone set on the porch rail, heart fluttering like a bird freed. The crowd fell silent as she began. She spoke of children erased by corporate power plays, of sealed affidavits and boardroom betrayals. But she also spoke of hope of the community that sheltered her, of the family she chose, and of the promise that no child would be lost in legal loopholes again. Mark and Lily stood a few feet behind her, faces alight with love. Tears glistened on neighbors' cheeks as Mia ended her remarks with a vow: "We will listen, we will fight, and we will bring every hidden child home." Applause rippled through the gathering, warm, heartfelt, undulating like a wave. Neighbors clapped Lily on the head and hugged Mark, many whispering their gratitude for Mia's bravery. As the crowd dispersed into potluck lines and laughter, Mia stayed on the porch for a moment, letting the moment wash over her. The old community center reborn her chosen surname in legal hands, her foundation destined to give voice to the voiceless. Later, as the sun dipped behind the Rockies in a flourish of gold and purple, Mia, Mark, and Lily sat on the porch steps sharing cold lemonade and leftover brownies. Lily leaned her head against Mia's shoulder, legs curled beneath her. Mark wrapped an arm around them both, feeling the gentle weight of family. Real family. Mia closed her eyes, savoring the quiet, the absence of corporate threats, the freedom of her new name, and she realized that resilience was not just surviving. It was choosing to bloom in the face of every storm. In the distance, the town's lights blinked on one by one, tiny constellations of home. Mia looked at Mark and he squeezed her hand. "We did it," he said softly. She nodded, voice thick with gratitude. "We did." And as dusk settled into night, the three of them watched the world they'd helped reshape, a world where children would no longer be hidden and where their own story would stand as proof that even the deepest betrayals could be overcome by the most determined hearts. Sunlight spilled across the rolling fields as Mia stepped out of the converted community center, a stack of storybooks tucked under her arm. The hum of activity drifted on the morning air, children's laughter, the scrape of saw blades from Mark's woodworking shop, and the gentle thrum of pumps in the garden beds freshly planted by the foundation's grant recipients. It had been only weeks since the Sophie Carlisle Foundation opened its doors, but the transformation felt profound, like watching a scar heal into strong living tissue. She paused at the edge of the gravel path, breathing in the scent of new pine behind the barn. Its weathered timbers now gleamed under a fresh coat of stain, each plank aligned and sturdy. Mark and a handful of volunteers were installing hinged doors on the loft, soon to be the site of summer dances and harvest dinners. Mia smiled at the sight, remembering the day she first crawled through that barn's broken window, unsure if she belonged anywhere. Now it stood as a symbol of rebuilding, echoing their shared journey. Behind her, Lily came bounding down the path, bare feet splashing through dew on the grass. "Mom!" "Look!" she cried, holding aloft a wooden birdhouse painted with bright swirls. "The grant paid for this, right?" She beamed, pointing to the foundation's logo stenciled on the side. Mia knelt to hug her daughter. Exactly, she said, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "This is for the Silver Ridge Youth Garden, your project to feed families through the summer. You did that." Lily threw her arms around Mia's waist. "I did." She giggled. "And Mr. Tanner helped me build it." Mark emerged from the open workshop doorway, his jeans dusted with sawdust, a chisel in hand. A broad smile split his face as he reached the pair. "You two making a morning of it?" he called, voice warm. Mia rose, lifting Lily to her hip. "We just came to see the progress," she said. "It looks amazing." He nodded proudly. "We're on schedule. The loft doors go up today, and next week I'll host the first woodworking class for teens using foundation funds. You'll show up, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," Mia promised. She glanced at her watch. "But first I have storytelling in half an hour. You know where to find me." She stood and brushed off her skirt, catching sight of a cluster of youths filing into the community hall, clipboards and pencils ready. Mark leaned against the workshop frame, watching her go. He caught Lily's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Your mom's something, isn't she?" Lily grinned up at him. "She is. I'm proud of her." Mark's eyes softened. "Me too, kiddo." He ruffled her hair, then gave an encouraging nod toward the barn. "Want to help me hang the last hinges?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Yes." Mia slipped inside the community center, where rows of folding chairs faced a small stage. Colorful posters lined the walls. "Tell your story, and our voices matter." She arranged her notes on the podium, then looked out at the crescent of expectant faces, children from local shelters and foster homes, some clutching worn stuffed animals, others scrawling on their clipboards. The Foundation's first grants had funded these workshops, giving kids a safe space to find their voice. She smiled and raised her hands. "Good morning, everyone. Who here likes listening to stories?" A dozen hands shot up, some hesitantly, some eagerly. Mia nodded and began weaving a tale about a hidden garden that bloomed under care and candlelight, a story crafted to mirror their own resilience. As she spoke, the children leaned forward, eyes bright pencils flying across paper as they sketched scenes inspired by her words. An hour later, Mia gathered their drawings and read a few aloud, celebrating each child's creativity. Applause broke out, shy at first, then wholehearted. A boy with tangled curls approached her afterward, lifting his picture of a phoenix rising from ash. "I drew this," he said softly, "because sometimes I feel like nothing can grow anymore." Mia knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you see how things can grow even from tough places," she said, voice gentle. "That's why we're here to help those sparks become full flames." Across town at the back of the barn, Mark and Lily hammered the final hinge into place. He tested the door's swing, and it closed with a firm click, sealing against the afternoon breeze. "Beautiful work, Lil," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ready to build the next thing?" Lily nodded vigorously. "Let's do it." They loaded their tools into the truck and Mark pointed to the horizon. "There's a group of kids coming here next week to build benches for the courtyard. Think you can help me show them how?" "Of course," Lily exclaimed. As they headed back, Mark's phone buzzed a text from David Lorne, confirming the Foundation's first grant checks had cleared and would be distributed to Silver Ridge's youth programs by week's end. He shared the news with Mia when she returned to the barn, where he found her wiping a layer of dust from a freshly sanded chair. "That's us," he said, handing her the phone. "First grants are live." Mia read the text, her eyes shining. She folded the chair's backrest into place and hugged Mark around the waist. "Look at what we've built together." He wrapped his arm around her and gestured toward the field where Lily chased a stray dog with a group of neighborhood kids. "This is family," he said, "not by blood but by choice." Mia rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the warm scent of fresh wood and wildflowers. By trust and second chances, she agreed. They stood in companionable silence, watching the swing of children's laughter and the sway of long grass in the breeze. The barn's timbers stood firm behind them, the workshop hummed with purpose, and the foundation's work brought life to the old community center. In that moment, every nail driven, every seed planted, every word spoken felt like healing proof that rescue could grow into extraordinary family and that a single act of kindness could blossom into a legacy of hope. The sky above the barn had shifted from rose to lavender, a soft haze framing the silhouette of the wraparound porch like a painted dream. Mia Carlisle Tanner and Mark Tanner stepped out together, shoes left behind on the threshold so they might feel the cool cedar beneath their feet. Lanterns handcrafted by Mark's students in his woodworking classes hung from the porch beams, their soft glow mingling with the first fireflies, tiny lantern bears drifting in the warm evening air. Mia paused at the top step, fingertips trailing along the smooth rail that only weeks ago had been pitted and splintered. Now it gleamed as solid as the life she had rebuilt. Mark came to stand beside her, leaving enough space for her to lean in, and she did, nestling her head against his shoulder. The breeze stirred her hair and brought the faint scent of honeysuckle from the garden beds below, where Lily had planted the season's first blooms under her mother's guidance. "We did this," Mia murmured, voice soft against the twilight. "I can't believe it." Mark's arm curved around her hand, resting on the small of her back. "I can," he said, lips brushing the side of her head. "Every nail, every seed, every story told. It's all here." Mia closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her like a healing balm. Images flickered at the edges of her mind, the red lipsticked woman who'd barged her into a waiting car, the marble foyer where she'd hidden in a closet, the stormy night when Mark's headlights had saved her life. Those memories still rose unbidden, but they no longer held her captive. Now they were threads in a tapestry of resilience woven through with hope and second chances. Below, Lily's laughter rang out as she chased a strand of fireflies across the yard, her bare feet light on the grass. A group of neighborhood children followed their squeals of delight, punctuating the hush of dusk. Mia smiled, tilting her head to watch her daughter's joy, a living testament to safety earned and innocence reclaimed. Mark tightened his arm around Mia. "Remember when none of this felt possible?" he asked. "When we thought the barn might collapse, the fields never heal, and the foundation would struggle to find its footing." She laughed, a clear bell in the evening air. "I do. I remember standing in that ruined barn, feeling more lost than ever. But you never gave up." She reached up, fingers brushing his cheek. Neither did Lily. He leaned into her touch. "We all needed each other," he replied. "You inspired us. You gave us a purpose bigger than any of us alone." Mia's heart swelled. She thought of the boardroom confrontation, the live television segment, the pale hush that followed as the nation absorbed her truth. She thought of Maribel Soto's trembling testimony, of Lena James's tireless detective work, of David Lorne's legal battles unearthing sealed affidavits. And she thought of the countless children who, because of her foundation, would no longer vanish into silence. The magnitude of it still took her breath away. She stepped closer on the porch, brushing dust from Mark's shoulder before settling beside him on a low bench. Together they watched the last sliver of sun disappear behind the rolling fields, the sky deepening from lavender to indigo. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, and the first stars blinked into existence. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" Mia asked, voice so soft she almost didn't speak aloud. Mark wrapped his arm fully around her and pulled her flush against him. "I do," he admitted, "but I also know it's not about knowing every step of the path. It's about walking it together." She nodded against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I used to think my story was written in loss," she said, fingers tracing the fabric of his shirt. "But now I see it's written in choice, choosing family, choosing truth, choosing hope." He kissed the top of her head. "And love," he added, voice low. "Choosing love every day." A lull hung between them, gentle and profound. The fireflies drifted close, their tiny lights weaving around the lanterns like living constellations come to earth. Mia reached out a hand and let one alight on her fingertip, the little creature's glow pulsing against her skin. She smiled in wonder, a laugh catching in her throat. "We're home," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. Mark squeezed her shoulder. "We are," he agreed. They sat in companionable silence, sharing the hush of twilight. Each breath filled them with the promise of tomorrow workshops to teach benches to build grants to award fields to tend. Beyond the barn, the community center's windows glowed where children painted stories on paper, their giggles drifting on the night breeze. After a while, Mia shifted and rested her head on Mark's shoulder, the weight of her journey finally yielding to peace. She thought of her mother's letter, the locket she still wore at her throat, and every step that had led her here. Trauma had marked her, but it had not defined her. She was no longer the child who vanished in a storm. She was the woman who returned reshaped by love and purpose. Mark whispered her name, and she looked up to find his eyes shining in the lantern light. "Thank you," he said softly, "for choosing this life, for trusting me, for letting me stand with you." Mia brushed her lips across his jaw. "Thank you," she replied, voice trembling with emotion, "for saving me again and again." Together they rose, stepping off the bench as the night deepened. Lanterns swung gently overhead, casting patterned shadows across the porch floor. The world beyond was vast and uncharted, but here on this porch, in this place they'd fought to preserve, they had everything they needed. Hand in hand they crossed into the barn's warmth, the door closing softly behind them. Outside the fields whispered of legacy and renewal, and the fireflies danced on tiny beacons in the gathering dark, reminding them that even the smallest light could dispel the deepest shadows. The renovated schoolhouse stood at the heart of Silver Ridge's oldest neighborhood, its red brick facade freshly painted and its wide windows thrown open to the warm spring air. Tucked between blooming magnolia trees and a field of daisies that Mia had helped plant last season, the building glowed like a beacon of possibility. On that bright Saturday morning, the Sophie Carlyle Foundation's official opening drew a crowd that filled the gravel courtyard. Neighbors in sun hats carrying dishes wrapped in cloth, volunteers wearing foundation t-shirts, and a handful of state representatives curious to see the little nonprofit born from a billionaire's lost daughter and a mechanic's kindness. Mia stood beside Mark at the ribbon stretched taut across the wide front doors, her heart fluttering as she looked over the faces she had come to know so well. There was Maribel Soto, clutching a small bouquet of white roses, Lena James, arms folded with a proud smile, David Lorne adjusting his tie and handing out programs, Emily Carlson no longer a child but the woman who had become Sophie Tanner holding Lily's hand. And there among them neighbors who had brought ham and cheese sliders, potato salad, and fresh berry cobblers, all dishes to share the kind that made potlucks feel like homecomings. Lily bounded forward, her bare feet stirring up puffs of gravel as she claimed the front steps for her storytelling circle. She tugged at her mother's skirt and whispered encouragement as a group of children formed a half moon around her, clutching new notebooks and crayons donated by the foundation. Without missing a beat, Lily launched into a tale of a garden that grew under moonlight, using big gestures and dramatic pauses that had the younger kids hanging on every word. Their laughter and wide-eyed gasps filled the courtyard with an energy both playful and earnest, exactly what Mia had envisioned when she first proposed weekend workshops here. Mark watched their daughter from the side, pride and awe softening his features. He glanced at Mia, who returned his look with a gentle nod, eyes glistening. They had built this together, a place where stories could blossom, where children could claim their voices rather than have them stolen away. As Lily wrapped up the final flourish of her story, and the moon smiled, knowing her secrets would never again be hidden, Mia stepped forward to guide the children inside. The lobby had been transformed into a gallery of their artwork, each piece vibrant with hope. Phoenixes rising from ash hands, reaching across borders, families drawn in bright crayon hearts. Parents and neighbors clustered around the displays, nodding and murmuring admiration as Lily tallied volunteers to help Mia lead the next session. Outside, the ribbon-cutting ceremony was about to begin. The small stage had been set in front of the entrance, a podium flanked by lanterns hanging from shepherd's hooks. Mia smoothed the front of her spring dress, a soft sky blue that complemented the wildflowers peeking through the gravel, and took a deep breath. Mark stood to her left, his hand resting lightly on her back. Together they faced the crowd, friends transformed into family strangers, now allies in the fight for every child's right to safety and belonging. Mia tapped the microphone, feeling the crackle of electricity as her voice carried across the open space. "Good morning," she began steady and clear. The chatter softened and all eyes turned to her. Today we open not just a building, but a promise that no child will ever vanish into silence while we have breath to speak on their behalf. She paused, glancing at the handrail sprouting daisies. This foundation is built on personal history. Yes, a history of loss and betrayal, but also on resilience, on the choice to transform pain into purpose. She looked to Mark. I would not have arrived here without the man beside me, my husband in heart, my partner in every sense. His kindness saved me once, and now we save each other every day. Mark smiled and tipped an imaginary hat, eliciting laughter and applause. Mia returned her gaze to the ribbon. So it gives me great honor to cut this ribbon, officially opening the Sophie Carlyle Foundation's new home. May it stand as a refuge for those who have lost their way and a launch pad for those finding theirs. With that, she snipped the ribbon with ceremonial scissors decorated with blue ribbons. The red fabric fell away and a burst of applause swept through the courtyard. Music rose as volunteers escorted guests inside for tours. The library turned reading nook, the multi-purpose room outfitted with cozy beanbags and storytelling circles, and the back room equipped for counseling sessions and legal clinics. Mia and Mark walked hand in hand through the open doors, watching neighbors stream past them. They paused in the main hall now, bright with sunlight and fresh paint. A plaque on the wall bore the foundation's name and mission statement, empowering voices, protecting futures. Mia placed her hand on the polished wood, savoring the solidity of her journey, how a girl once erased found her way back and built a haven out of heartbreak. Lily tugged at Mia's skirt again, pulling her toward a cluster of kids gathered around storyboards. "Mom, look!" "Jason drew me as a firefly," Lily exclaimed, pointing to a crayon sketch of her flitting through a field. Mia knelt beside them, ruffling Lily's hair. "That's wonderful," she said, greeting each child by name and marveling at their creativity. "Does that firefly have a story?" The children chattered eagerly, and Mia listened, realizing how far she had come from voiceless child to guide, from scared sleeper to advocate, from hidden heiress to community leader. The foundation's first grants had already funded garden projects, after-school programs, and emergency housing for kids at risk of being lost to bureaucracy. Each success felt like a seed taking root. Later, the potluck dishes emerged under the neon glow of string lights. Plates of mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, and homemade pies lined long tables. Friends and neighbors found seats on picnic blankets and folding chairs, passing platters and sharing stories. Mia and Mark navigated the gathering, plates in hand, greeting familiar faces and hearing tales of impact. A foster child given legal aid, a runaway reunited with her family, a teen finding purpose in Mark's workshop. Each testimony wove together into a tapestry of hope. As the sun sank low, its final rays painted the fields in gold. Mia and Mark drifted outside, watching the lanterns glow again on the barn porch. Fireflies emerged in clouds, dancing between the poles and bobbing above the grassy knoll. Lily chased them with a jar in hand, laughter trailing like a ribbon. The air smelled of honeysuckle and fresh wood, two scents she would forever associate with renewal. Mia slipped her hand into Mark's and rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to dread Saturdays," she said softly. "I thought they'd mean nothing but distance from everything I lost." He squeezed her hand. "Now they mean home." She exhaled a long, contented breath that carried away the last vestiges of fear. "My past was never a cage," she whispered, "but a launch pad." Mark tilted her chin up, eyes reflecting the firefly light. "And we're just getting started." Together they watched their community celebrate under the emerging stars, a testament to the power of one act of kindness blossoming into countless lives saved. In that ordinary Saturday made extraordinary by love and courage, Mia realized that every new dawn held the promise of another chapter, one she would write with open eyes and a heart unbound.